got the book in one hand and a whole page of notes in the other, so you know it's going to be a review video. Tasty. I honestly cannot remember the last time I did a full review on a book, so I might be a little bit rusty in articulating my thoughts, but hopefully it's gonna be okay. So I'm pretty sure I don't have to introduce what this book is. This is Beautiful World, Where Are You?, the third book from international author sensation Sally Rooney, who obviously has previously written Conversations with Friends and Normal People. And for me, like a lot of others, this was one of my most anticipated reads of the year, which is kind of funny to think about actually, because when I think about her previous novels, Normal People and Conversations with Friends, I really enjoyed Normal People and I didn't like Conversations with Friends, which I think is quite a common theme. Either you like one and you don't like the other, whichever way around it is. So if you think about it, I actually only really had like a 50-50 success rate with Sally Rooney's novels, so for it to be such a highly anticipated release was a bit strange, because it's not like she's one of my favourite authors and I've read so many books by her and loved all of them. I actually only had liked one of hers before out of two, so that wasn't like the most encouraging track record, but nevertheless I was very excited. I think I just got swept up in the literary hype like a lot of other people. And now that I've actually read it, I think I can confidently say that it sits in the middle between Normal People and Conversations for me. So it's better than Conversations, I enjoyed it a lot more than that, but it's not quite on the level of how much I liked Normal People. So it just sits nicely in the middle of those two. So if you're familiar with Sally Rooney's work, you'll probably know that the plot element of the book is probably going to be quite light. Her books tend to follow these characters and their thoughts and their sort of mundane daily life. There is not really a big inciting incident or any sort of intricate plot that happens. It's sort of just living through the minutiae of daily life and observing small little things that young millennials do and thoughts that they are having. And that's again why I think a lot of her books come up to a lot of potentially unfair criticisms, that nothing happens, it's just millennial navel gazing and they're just so self-indulgent and all of this stuff. And I do wonder if that is potentially because she is a female author. I mean, I think a lot of men write very indulgent books and that doesn't get, you know, commented on quite so much. But anyway, and also because she's fairly young, I think, again, that's something else that people like to sort of pit against her. Like, well, she's young and a woman, what does she know about the world and the human condition and all of this shit, which is irritating. So Rooney's characters often come up against the criticism that they are selfish or that they are self-indulgent and that they just act impulsively with no care or awareness of how their actions are affecting those around them. So characters in her books have often like cheated in relationships or, you know, done selfish things that have hurt other people and things like that, things that real people actually do. And in a weird way, this book almost, I don't think she's purposely trying to respond to that criticism, but the characters in this novel are much more aware of the world around them. So in this book we follow Alice and Eileen, who are best friends, who have been, you know, close friends for a very long time. They met at uni, I believe, or even before then. No, I think they met at uni, and they've just been in and out of each other's lives. And now Alice has just gotten a new apartment in a sort of rural area. She's renting and she's an author and she's gone away to sort of take a break from her public life and you know, write a new book. And Eileen is in Dublin, in the city, doing a job at a literary journal that she doesn't really care that much about, and she has this sort of on again off again relationship with her childhood friend Simon, and the two friends write emails to each other. So part of this novel is like an epistolary novel. We find out more about who they are as people and what they're thinking about, what they care about in these emails to each other. And these emails between Alice and Eileen almost read like non-fiction. It's almost like Sally Rooney is sort of paving the way for her to write a series of non-fiction essays at some point, because a lot of them are very heavy on historical fact or ideas from various philosophers throughout history about what constitutes a good society, and the fact that we're sort of approaching this boiling point of late stage capitalism where everything is just going to collapse. And so what is the point of pursuing friendships, going out for dinner with your friends, or trying to find a job that you love, or pursuing a person that you love when everything's going to just end and everything's gonna collapse. And these two characters really feel the weight of that, the weight of the world essentially, and how it's creeping into their daily life, and how can you function normally when your life as a sort of privileged middle-class white woman living in the UK is being facilitated by people in poorer countries working minimum wage to get, you know, your food imported to you, or to make clothes for you to buy cheaply in like high street stores. So there's a lot of sense of privilege and class awareness and guilt around that, and what is the point of going around our silly little lives, these theatrical performances of happiness, when actually people aren't happy and we're just waiting for this end to happen. It's quite hard going initially, because you're just sort of dropped into these letters and you're like, whoa, okay, this is fun, you know? And you think, okay, these characters have self-awareness, they have empathy, they have an interest in the world around them. Does this actually actively change the way that they behave towards each other? Not really, and maybe that's the point. So like I said, Sally Rooney's characters often come across as criticism in people's reviews, that they are selfish, or that they act impulsively, or that they are horrible, horrible people, and why would we want to read about them, or why would we care about them? And then Sally Rooney presents us with these characters that are different. They feel guilt and emotion and shame, and they have an awareness of their privilege and an awareness that their lives are mundane and silly and pointless, but that actually doesn't change the way that they behave and the way that they treat each other. And I think that's quite an interesting point, and potentially points out that all of this awareness and guilt is simply performative. And that was something that I found really quite interesting about the book. And one of my favourite extracts from the novel is where I can't remember who's writing to who, one of the girls is writing to the other one of the girls and explaining that they once had a life book where they wrote down beautiful things that made them happy throughout the day, and how they were sort of gradually unable to come up with things. I could just read it to you. I've got the page number written down, so I'm just going to read it to you instead of me trying to like butcher and paraphrase. Okay, so it's a letter from Eileen to Alice. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, but a few years ago I started keeping a diary, which I called the Life Book. I began with the idea of writing one short entry each day, just a line or two, describing something good. I suppose by good I must have meant something that made me happy or brought me pleasure. I went back to look at it the other day, and the early entries are all from that autumn, almost 6 years ago now. Dry, upturned sycamore leaves scuttling like claws along the South Circular Road. The artificial buttered taste of popcorn in the cinema. Pale yellow sky in the evening, Thomas Street draped in mist. Things like that. I didn't miss a day through all of September, October, November that year. I could always think of something nice, and sometimes I would even do things for the purpose of putting them in the book, like taking a bath or going for a walk. At the time I felt like I was just absorbing life, and at the end of the day I never had to strain to think of anything good I had seen or heard. It just came to me, even the words came, because my only aim was to get the image down clearly and simply so that I would later remember how it felt. And reading those entries now, I do remember what I felt, or at least what I saw and heard and noticed. Walking around, even on a bad day, I would see things. I mean, just the things that were in front of me. People's faces, the weather, traffic, the smell of petrol from the garage, the feeling of being rained on, completely ordinary things. And in that way, even the bad days were good because I felt them and remembered feeling them. There was something delicate about living like that, like I was an instrument and the world touched me and reverberated inside me. After a couple of months, I started to miss days. Sometimes I would fall asleep without remembering to write anything, but on other nights I'd open the book and not know what to write. I wouldn't be able to think of anything at all. When I did make entries, they were increasingly verbal and abstract, song titles or quotes from novels or text messages from friends. By spring I couldn't keep it up anymore. I started to put the diary away for weeks at a time. It was just a cheap black notebook I got at work, and eventually I'd take it back to look out at the entries from the previous year. At that point, I found it impossible to imagine ever feeling again as I had apparently once felt about rain or flowers. It wasn't just that I failed to be delighted by sensory experiences, it was that I didn't actually seem to have them anymore. I would walk to work or go out for groceries or whatever, and by the time I came home again I wouldn't be able to remember seeing or hearing anything distinctive at all. I suppose I was seeing but not looking. The visual world just came to me flat, like a catalogue of information. I never looked at things anymore in the way I had before. Reading the book again now gives me such a strange sensation. Was I really like that once? A person capable of dropping down in the most fleeting of impressions, and dilating them somehow, dwelling inside them, and finding riches and beauty there. Apparently I was, for a couple of hours, but I am not that person. I wonder whether the book itself, the process of writing the book, caused me to live that way, or whether I wrote because I wanted to record that kind of experience as it was happening. I've tried to remember what was going on in my life at the time, in case that might help me to understand. I know I was 23, I had just started working at the magazine, you and I were living together in that horrible flat in the Liberties, and Kate was still in Dublin, and Tom and Aoife. We went out to parties together, we had people over for dinner, we drank too much wine, we got into arguments. Sometimes Simon would call me on the phone from Paris, we could complain to each other about work, and while we were laughing, I would hear Natalie in the background putting away plates in the kitchen. All my feelings and experiences were in one sense extremely intense, in another sense completely trivial, because none of my decisions seemed to have any consequences, and nothing about my life, the job, the apartment, the desires, the love affairs, struck me as permanent. I felt anything was possible, that there were no doors shut behind me, and that out there somewhere, as yet unknown, there were people who would love and admire and want to make me happy. Maybe that explains in some way the openness I felt toward the world. Maybe without knowing it, I was anticipating my future. I was watching for signs. So the reason I think that passage struck me, and really I think encapsulates what the novel is about, is because it is so much about not just seeing, but looking and experiencing and feeling present. And as someone that has struggled a lot with dissociation caused by anxiety and things like that, the feeling of feeling like you're living life on autopilot, or you're just going through days and not actively noticing anything, that's something that really, really struck me, and that I think I hadn't heard articulated so well before. And again, people will accuse her of like self-indulgent millennial navel-gazing, but these are real things that people feel and can relate to, and it doesn't mean that like that's the biggest struggle you have in your life. Okay, you're so privileged, the biggest struggle that you have in your life is that you don't notice a pretty tree on your way to work. Sure, that if you want to criticize it and say that's fine, that's true, but whatever you're going through in life, you can have days like that where you just think, what is the point? I've not lived today, I'm just existing, I'm just surviving. And that's something, like I said, I hadn't felt articulated before, and the strongest thing about this novel, I think, is that articulation of that feeling of just existing to exist. And again, like I said, it's a very privileged thing to be able to exist without any sort of real external pressure or struggle, but it doesn't mean that it's not worth talking about, because I think it is something that a lot of people feel. Especially at that age that she's talking about when she's 23, and it's like you've done uni, you've done school, you've done everything you were told to do and supposed to do, and now your life is in your own hands and you don't know what to do with it, and you feel like you're wasting it, and that anxiety is everywhere. And I can very much speak to that because I am 23 on the cusp of turning 24, so I very much understood that. The friendship between Alice and Eileen and their letters to each other is the strongest part of the novel for me. There are certain side plots with, Alice meets this guy Felix on a dating app and they're dating, and then, like I said, Eileen has this on again off again thing with her childhood sweetheart Simon. I'm not gonna lie to you, I wasn't that invested in either of the romances. I only really was there for the friendship, and I think that's the part of the novel that is the most rich. But Alice and Eileen only meet in person for one section of the novel towards the end. I think it's in like the last third. They meet up in person to stay together. And there's a moment where they meet at the train station, which is really beautiful. It's like one paragraph. Again, I could just read it to you. Like, I'm sorry. I'm not like auditioning to be an audiobook person, I promise. I just feel like this one paragraph really, again, articulates the sort of main theme of the novel, and I think it actually uses the title, potentially. So this is Alice and Eileen meeting in person after months of just exchanging emails about what's going on in their lives. On the platform of a train station, late morning, early June, two women embracing after a separation of several months. Behind them, a tall, fair-haired man alighted from a train carrying two suitcases. The women unspeaking, their eyes closed tight, their arms wrapped around one another for a second, 2 seconds, 3. Were they aware, in the intensity of their embrace, of something slightly ridiculous about this tableau, something almost comical, as someone nearby sneezed violently into a crumpled tissue, as a dirty, discarded plastic bottle scuttled across the platform under a breath of wind, as a mechanized billboard on the station wall rotated from an advertisement for hair products to an advertisement for car insurance, as life in its ordinariness and even ugly vulgarity imposed itself everywhere all around them. Or were they in this moment unaware, or something more than unaware? Were they somehow invulnerable to, untouched by vulgarity and ugliness, glancing for a moment into something deeper, something concealed beneath the surface of life, not unreality but a hidden reality, the presence at all times in all places of a beautiful world? So again, I think that passage articulates that search, that want to appreciate something beautiful even when the world in all its horribleness is existing around you, and really clinging on to those fleeting moments of beauty. Something I haven't mentioned yet that I also think is a really interesting aspect of the novel is the fact that Alice is an author, and not just an author, she's a very, very successful, very, very rich author, much like Sally Rooney. And I think people have picked up on it in their reviews, that Alice is potentially not a reflection of Sally, but like definitely a vehicle through which Sally can vent her frustrations about being a very, very famous literary author. So there are sections of the book where Alice is very, very scathing about the literary world and her place in it, and the whole idea of being famous for what you've written, and that people want to put you on this big pedestal and ask you what you think about very deep and emotional things, and they put stock into your opinion because you've written this book, and they give you all this money, and the act of putting you on this pedestal, giving you all this money because of what you've written, actually makes you less authentic as an author, because it takes you away from society, it takes you away from real life. They separate you from society by giving you all this money, putting you in this nice house somewhere, and making you think that your thoughts are more important and more valuable than just everyday people. And the act of that separation actually makes you less of an interesting author or interesting person, because you are so far removed from people, ordinary people. And I thought that was a really interesting detail. I mean, I think there's definitely shades in Rooney's novels of what you would call autobiographical writing, or just sort of very plain writing about what it is like to be a young millennial person. That could be derived from her life, or just lives of people that she knows. But this feels like a very specific vehicle for Sally Rooney herself to write about something that she has personally felt, and that I think was quite interesting. I don't know if I've sort of seen it so explicitly in one of her novels before, being like, this is a thing that I have felt and I'm writing about it through this character. And I'm very aware that everything I've said so far seems very positive, and the extracts that I've read I've really loved and connected to. So far you'd think that like, oh, you're really loving this book, I'm sure you gave it 5 stars. I did it. I mean, ratings don't really mean anything, but I ended up giving it 3, and I think it's because the ending just didn't quite stick the landing for me for quite a few reasons. And I feel like I have been fairly unspoilery so far, but obviously if we're going to be talking about the ending, warning, if you've not read this book, I will be talking about how it ends, so that is a spoiler, and if you don't want to watch anymore, fair dues, go read it, come back, or don't, whatever. I will be talking now about the ending and how I feel. So what is weird about the ending is that it ends in the pandemic. I mean, that was a bit of a slap in the face, to be honest with you. The novel ends with our 2 characters writing to each other whilst they're in the 2020 COVID-19 lockdown, and that was very surreal to read about, because like, hey, I just lived through that. Wait, what? How is this in a book already? But the main ending of the novel is this letter in which Eileen writes to Alice. So Eileen from Dublin writes to her author friend Alice, who is rural. So Eileen writes that she is pregnant, and throughout the novel both of them in their letters have grappled again with this idea of, is it irresponsible to want things, to do things, to start a family when the world is so terrible, and when, you know, society is heading towards this eventual collapse? Like, is it irresponsible to have children and like live your life and, you know, whatever? And they have both grappled with those ideas, and I think Alice falls on the side of, no, I don't want children. I don't think that that's good use of my time. I can't remember exactly how she feels about it, but basically Eileen ends on this like very positive note, and she sort of talks about how, you know, regardless of whether or not Eileen has a child, there will be women who have children, and then their children will go on to serve society, to try and help society. And does she want to be part of those women? Does she want to be part of that narrative of helping society, of the future? Does she want to be part of that, or does she want to be removed from that? And it is sort of, I don't feel like it's a call to action, because Eileen does say in this section that like, I realise that not all women should do this or will feel this way, but this is just how I feel. And it just was a bit strange, because Eileen struggles a lot throughout the novel, and that bit that I read about like her writing the life book and trying to look for the beauty in her life, she's sort of frustrated with the mundanity of her life, and she has this on again off again thing with her childhood friend Simon, and she's just not very happy. You know, her friend is miles and miles away, they don't see each other very much. Eileen has lived quite a lonely life throughout the novel, and she's grappling with all this anxiety about what it means to live a good life and a simple life, and you know, what does she actually want and what will make her happy. And then you see her at the end of the novel settled down with Simon. They've moved in together, they're probably getting married. I can't remember if they're actually engaged or not, or maybe they haven't gotten married, but they're definitely together, and she's pregnant, so they're like this big family unit, and she's so happy. And I don't know if I'm just like being too much of like a black and white feminist about this, but it just seems very strange that like she's struggling throughout the novel, and then as soon as she settles down, gets a man and has a baby, she's like really happy and can suddenly see like the point of life. That just struck me as like a very weird note to end on, and I guess because personally I don't want children, and I don't prescribe to that idea of like it's rebellious and an act of hope just to have children even though the world's going to collapse. I just and that's just a very personal preference. I think there are, you know, women out there who will resonate with what Eileen says at the end of the book, and it will see that as like a hopeful, beautiful note to end on. I just personally didn't see that. So yeah, ultimately I think it left me feeling a little bit conflicted, because I had been so enjoying this relationship between Alice and Eileen. I loved the parts where they're writing to each other, I loved the part where they met in person. I was not invested, like I said, in the romantic subplots, sure. And then when we got to the end, and I was really sort of like, the ending was what was going to either push it up to like a higher, I don't know. I feel so weird talking about ratings because it doesn't matter, like who cares if it's 4, 5, 3 stars. But by the time I got to the halfway point, I was like, I'm enjoying this, I like these two friends, I like this focus on friendship, and the ending is either what's gonna push it up beyond like what I felt about normal people, or like not be as good as that. And it feels silly to compare them, but I think that's just what you do subconsciously anyway. You just want to know where this sits in her sort of oeuvre, and a lot of people have said this is her most accomplished book, and I sort of agree with that. I think like she is doing more experimental things with her writing, like the way that she's included these sort of letters and the sort of non-fiction element to them. I think it is definitely the novel that she has probably researched the most and feels the most meaty in terms of content. Yeah, I think just because of the way it ends, and because of the sort of time spent on these romantic subplots, it just didn't hit as powerful as it could have for me if it had just been about these two female friends and like the anxieties that they feel in the world. But the parts that did worked really well for me, so that's why it's a sort of mixed bag. Like the parts that were strong were really, really strong, and the parts that I didn't like, so it's yeah, I don't know if I've articulated this well at all. Like I said, it's been a very long time since I've done a review on like a singular book, so I hope I've made sense. I think we're just getting to the point where I've just said too many words now, so I'm gonna wrap this up by saying, if you've read Beautiful World, Where Are You? I would love, love, love to hear your thoughts in the comments, especially on the ending, because obviously when I've been reading other people's reviews, they haven't explicitly said what their thoughts on the ending are because they don't want to give spoilers. So I have given the spoiler, I have said what the ending is, so if you're still here, I'm hoping that you've read it and can tell me what you thought of the ending in the comments. And yeah, I would love to hear from you regarding this book. I don't know why I've gone into robot mode, but anyway. Thank you so much for watching this review, and I will see you very soon with another video soon. Goodbye.